Every life has a story behind it. But are you writing the story you actually want to? We're here to explore what it means to live an intentional life that echoes for generations by leaving a better legacy. You can find out more at davidcreyes.com. But now, let's dive in. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Legacy Owners Podcast. I'm David Reyes, and today I want to talk about the idea of creative spaces. How do we build atmosphere and create spaces where we can actually thrive in our businesses, where you can actually be inspired and create things that are going to motivate you to take care of clients, new ideas, new ways of doing things? I mean, the whole point of entrepreneurship is that we build, we create, we invent, we ideate, and we make things better. And one of the things that I've found personally is I'm a person who loves good atmosphere. Like, I love when I go to a restaurant, it's not just about how the food tastes. It's how does the environment around me feel? What is the lighting like? What are the sounds that I'm hearing? What are the smells? And all of that comes into play. I love atmosphere. And I'll be honest, living in a family with 4 kids, that's not something we get a whole lot of these days. We have kids running around our house and smells that you really hoped you'd never have to experience in your lifetime. And it's a lot of fun, but it's not a whole lot of atmosphere. And I'll tell you, for anybody who's an entrepreneur, especially if you work at home, especially if you have an office where you're surrounded by other people and you don't really have full control over the environment around you, it can be really difficult to create spaces that feel like you're able to invent, you're able to create, you're able to build. Several years ago, my wife and I really tried to take regular time away. We try to take vacations, we try to get breaks and just moments where we can just have space together and just be away from the kids. And so it had been a while, several years ago, and we really needed it. And so I started doing some research into, we only had one night. We were both working hard. We had lots of young kids. And so we were only able to get coverage for the kids for one night. And so I'm researching and I'm looking at hotels and I'm looking at all the pictures and I'm looking at like how nice do they look. But I'm also looking at budget. At the time, we were in a low budget season, and so it was like, okay, well, what can we actually afford? So I'm looking for affordable atmosphere. And I made a mistake. I made a big mistake because I looked at this hotel, and from the pictures it looked great. And I was like, this is going to be an incredible trip. They've got a pool, they've got a hot tub. And we got there and it was a total roach coach. I mean, we didn't want to walk out of the bed to get to the bathroom without putting shoes on first. I mean, I'm sure we heard scurrying noises. It was awful. And I remember the whole point was to get away, for us to have time together, to just relax. And I remember watching my wife's response to the atmosphere, and she was not able to relax. She was not able to enjoy it. And so, actually, even though we had the space that we needed, because the atmosphere, because the environment was just bad, she wasn't able to relax. Neither of us were able to relax and get the enjoyment, the fulfillment out of it that we needed. And I think often that's what happens when we're trying to build in business. We're trying to create, we're trying to make sure that what we're doing is innovative and helpful and creative. And I think sometimes we get stuck because the environments around us are actually not conducive to that. You know, what takes place inside of you often will manifest outwardly, but the reverse can also be true. The space you're surrounded by can really have a heavy impact on what happens inside, internally. And so when we look at the power of atmosphere, the power of creating an atmosphere where you can feel like you're immersed in something and what you're immersed in is actually conducive to the direction you're trying to go. When I was a kid, we used to go to Universal Studios in Florida, and we lived in Florida and we loved it. We got to go a lot of the time. And one of my favorite rides, there were two that I loved, and they were both immersive experiences in different ways. In one of them, there was this you're seated around this kind of tube in the middle of the room, and they teleport an alien into the tube, and at one point it breaks out and it's flying around the room, and you can't see it because it's dark, but you can feel the wind of the wings hitting your face. And then at one point it lands behind your chair, and again, you can't see anything, but you feel these puffs of air, and you can feel its breath on you and hear from the speaker that's in your chair as if it's growling right in your ear. Another incredible one was King Kong was one of my favorites. We would go on this King Kong ride. I don't even think they have it anymore. And in this ride, there's one point where your train that you're on gets kind of grabbed by King Kong, and it's being lifted up, and you see his face, and he roars at you. And as he roars, again, you feel the air of his breath, and it actually smells. It smells like bananas. And I love that the creators of this ride took the time to make sure, how do they make it as realistic as possible? And what it does is your mind convinces you that what's going on around you could be true, and it convinces you that you're in this other place. And so often that's what happens in the spaces that we inhabit. When we look at our workspaces, when we look at our office, when you look at how your home is, even sometimes the clutter, the disaster, the things that just build up over time, it's not that it's a shame thing, not that it's something that we should feel like guilt over, but at the same time, if we don't learn how to create better environments, better systems, we're not going to be able to innovate, we're not going to be able to create, we're not going to be successful as entrepreneurs, because what we are building is going to come from a place of chaos. So, a couple of things that we need to focus on. First, we've got to learn how to beautify our workspaces. There's something about recognizing what inside of me helps me to think better when I'm in a certain environment, when I'm in a place where, maybe it's nature, maybe it's a lot of heavy motivation, maybe it's just Spartan, like maybe it's almost nothing, like you're just your furniture, clean surfaces, clean floors, and maybe that's it. But you got to figure out what works for you, because I can tell you there's some people that will say, I work really well in the mess. Like, I have my system, the clutter is a part of my process. And I'd probably be one of those people who in the past I might have had the tendency to think that way or to say that. Because I one of the things I do is I print everything. Like, I'm a digital person. Like, I know so much about the technology and how all this stuff works. Like, I'm the one who's constantly tech support for everybody else around me. But at the same time, I love the feel, the touch, the visual of physical things. And so when I see something I like, I will print it, or I will create my own version of it and print it. And so I have paper everywhere. And part of what I learned to do is to be able to funnel that down, because at first that was a part of my process. But I began to realize that what ended up happening was it was just clutter. It was just noise. And that noise in my office began to be reflected in my mind. It began to be reflected in my ability to do what I was called to do and supposed to do throughout the day. And so now I still do a lot of printing. I still like that visual of seeing the things that I'm thinking about and working on, and what is being spoken to me in that season by other leaders or by God. And so I print them out, I pop them on my wall, and I have kind of a rotating wall of content that I'm focusing on in that season. And then everything else I begin to kind of find its own place. So I may print something and file it in a specific location so I can come back to it. That keeps my office clutter free. It keeps me able to think and process and build in an environment that feels good to me, that I like to be in. I think sometimes we get in this situation where we know we have to get work done, and we go into the environment and we don't actually want to be there because it doesn't feel good. And because we don't want to be there, we start to begin to delay and procrastinate and put things off. And your ability to produce is so limited sometimes by what you've surrounded yourself with. So, like I said, the first thing I think we need to learn to do is to beautify our workspaces. We need to think about what helps us to be creative, what helps us to think better and feel better about where we are. And that's going to be different for different people. But learning what that is going to be massively impactful. Another thing we need to do is, I think, to get into new spaces, one of the things that we find is that creativity thrives where we can see new experiences and smells, and new things are around us, new people. Sometimes the noise of things that we're not familiar with jogs our ability to think outside of our own boxes, because all of a sudden we're getting feedback and input from other sources instead of just what we're normally used to. all of that begins to mix into our ability to create and think and process. And things you might have been stuck in, maybe the one thing you need to get that creative space reopened is to get out into a new place where you're surrounded by things you're not familiar with and allow yourself to try to focus on it there. We take in new input. One of the things that I like to say is we have to break out of the norm so we can interrupt typical thinking. Typical thinking leads to typical outcomes. And typical thinking, what I mean by that is whenever you fall back into kind of your normal pattern, it's not that normal is bad. And I think all of us find this kind of stasis, the status quo, where it's like, this is the way I operate, this is my sweet spot. But if we let that become the only norm and we just settle there, we actually limit ourselves from being able to grow beyond that. So typical thinking is just limited thinking. It's being stuck, really. And it leads to typical outcomes. You're only going to get what you've always gotten if you think the same way that you've always thought. And so that's one of the reasons that people go to conferences and they go to get exposed to atypical thinking, new ideas, and we can do that ourselves by getting into new spaces, by exposing ourselves to other thoughts and things going on around us. Sometimes I'll be in an environment that has nothing to do with business. I'll be in an environment where somebody's, in church or in a ministry setting or at a conference that's about the prophetic. And in this situation, in this place, somebody's speaking, and all of a sudden, one word or one phrase or one idea just pops in my mind. And all of a sudden, I'm writing note after note after note about revelation I'm getting that will help me in business, that will help me discover the next steps, that helps me to create. So often, when I'm in those spaces, I'm able to create so much more than I can when I just stay in my standard normal place. I think the last thing that we really need to do is to learn how to collaborate on spaces. So when I go into someone else's space, whether it's, watching somebody on YouTube or whether it's actually visiting someone else's office, I love to absorb and learn from what they're doing. And going into their spaces, I can see how their office is set up. If I'm looking at YouTube videos, I look at where the camera is placed. I look at how they're doing things, the backdrop. I look at how people file things. I look at what's the sales process that someone else uses. And I learn so much about what I do and don't want to do. I get to absorb and I get to kind of pick the parts that really fit with me and the way that I work, the way that I think, and I get to leave the others aside. And when you do that from multiple sources, collaborating in that way, you're actually going to learn how to get the best of different worlds that you'd never be exposed to if you didn't learn how to collaborate. When I say collaborate, the other piece of that also is inviting people into your spaces. That might mean you have people visit your office. That might mean you have meetings there. It might mean that you invite feedback from other people. That's why mentorship is so important, because collaboration requires us to be vulnerable and to share, this is what my process looks like. How could it be improved? What could be better? And all of a sudden, our creativity begins to grow because the space that we're in is no longer just our space, but it's been influenced by people who have gone further than us in certain areas, who you can benefit from ways of doing things that they do that maybe you'd never thought of. Conversely, sometimes we'll get input from other people where they'll say, what you're doing here is fantastic. I've never thought about doing it that way. And when other people learn from us by being in those shared spaces, we get to the benefit of knowing, like, wow, that's really refreshing. Like, I kind of took that for granted, but to know that somebody saw that as innovative and as unique and as effective, and they enjoyed that and it benefited them, that means a lot. And it means that I can stop taking that for granted and actually appreciate it, celebrate it, enjoy it, maybe improve it. And so having those shared spaces and being able to operate that way is huge. The last thing I want to say about this is that we can stop ourselves from being willing to break out of those molds because we get so used to the way that things are. We have the way that we do things. We like it. It's what we're used to. And I like to say that discomfort is the way. Discomfort is the way. We need to learn how to get out of the norm, out of the zone of easy and into discomfort, because trying new things will get us new results. I think about how easy it can be to say, I have my system, I have my pattern, I have my process, and I'm so familiar with it that I don't want to deviate from it. And yet, sometimes the breakthrough that you're looking for is just on the other side of busting everything apart. Sometimes I like to kind of deconstruct my ways of doing things, my process, my ways of thinking, and look at what are the components and the building blocks that I've built up, and how can I break that down again and build it back better. And that's from everywhere, from how I organize my office space to how I organize my schedule throughout the day, my habits. And being able to refine those things is uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable because we have to second guess ourselves, and we have to go, maybe what I've been doing so far, even though I feel good about it, maybe it actually isn't the best way. In fact, maybe it's time to start over and build again and start something new. Sometimes that's exactly what your business needs, to be able to pull the pieces apart and look at them and look at, how could we reorganize this? Creativity thrives on the ability to be uncomfortable and go back to the beginning. Creativity thrives when you can say, what I've done is good, but what comes next is better. And we don't hold on to the past so tightly that we can't embrace what could happen in the future. There's this incredible scene in Pirates of the Caribbean, one of the movies, where they're in this kind of nether world and they're trying to figure out how to get back. And Jack Sparrow's looking at this map, and all of a sudden he turns a part of the map, and he realizes that they need to flip the ship upside down. And so they go through this whole process to really flip the entire ship so that it's underwater. And it's only then that they're able to get back to where they're supposed to be. Sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes it takes us being able to say, I'm going to look at things from a completely different perspective. I'm going to reorient myself. Up is down and down is up. And that doesn't mean we disregard what we know works. It doesn't mean we disregard what we know is truth. But what it does mean is that we don't operate on simple presuppositions when we could evaluate them and consider them and see, is there a better way? One of the things that I want you to walk away from this with is this: God's given you powerful dreams for you to build, for you to grow, for you to scale, and to bless you and your family, but also to bless the world around you. And one of the reasons that I do what I do here with Legacy Owners is because I believe the world will be better when your dreams are functioning in the full capacity of what's possible with them. When your effectiveness and your ability to actually take that dream, not just to 30% reality, but to 100%, the full vision of what God put inside of you, that's what's going to change the world. And in this entrepreneurial Christian marketplace, we need more Christians who are able to be innovative, to be creative, to invent things and do things in ways that nobody else has ever thought of. And so much of that comes in partnership with God as we connect with the Holy Spirit, as we learn to think outside of ourselves and receive what God wants to reveal to us. So I want to encourage you, go further, build bigger, think different, reevaluate. And if your space is not one that you enjoy being in, look at what you could do, invest in that. And sometimes that's a financial investment. Sometimes that's, you know what? I need new furniture. I need a new picture on my wall. There's times where God's told me to buy a picture just because it would create a space that I feel better about, and it's something that I enjoy. So do that. Look at how you can invest in the place where you create so that the space around you reflects the clarity and the focus and the innovation that you want to have in your own mind. Those will be sympathetic systems that connect with each other, where what's in your mind can connect to what you're surrounded by and vice versa. Thank you for listening. If you want to follow me, I'd love to have you join me on Instagram, X, TikTok, everywhere I am. It's theDavidCReyes. So I'd love to have you follow me, comment, let me know what you think, and we'll see you next time.